Hi, and welcome to the Thriving Farmer podcast, where we hope to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming and food production. This is your host, Michael. Today's podcast guest is Ted Lebow. Now, Ted is the co-founder of Kitchen Table Consultants, where they help small farms learn how to make sound financial decisions and understand how they make a profit, not just how much profit they make. He regularly presents seminars all around the country on cash flow, profitability, and how to know if you're profitable. Ted was the interim executive director of the PASA in Pennsylvania, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, and has sat on multiple nonprofit board of directors. And he's helped entrepreneurs and nonprofits raise over $60 million in debt, equity, and donations. I think Ted and I get along so well because we're both, we say what we think, we're not afraid to say it, and we're serial entrepreneurs. So, Ted started his first business venture back in 1980, a farm in Idaho, where he bought his first tractor, signed his first loan with the Production Credit Association, and started waking up in the middle of the night worrying about the rain ruining his hay crop. So definitely get Ted's background. And, this is one of those podcasts, I think, which is going to raise some ire and maybe ruffle a few feathers. And that's okay. I think Ted looks at the sustainable farm industry and our community in a very unique way, seeing everything as, dollars and cents. And whereas we don't necessarily want to use that as the sole method of accounting for our farms, I think it's a great place to start, because if a farm's not profitable to start off with, there's no way to make it sustainable long term. So Ted lives outside of Philadelphia. He's a woodworker at heart like myself, loves wood. And I think you're going to enjoy this episode. It's definitely wide-ranging. It's a little bit long, but you're going to get a good taste of who Ted is and kind of how he thinks about farming and money. Welcome to the Thriving Farmers podcast, Ted.
Good morning. How are you, Michael?
I am doing well. So tell us a little bit more in detail about your business, your company, and what you guys do on a day-to-day basis to help farmers.
So Kitchen Table Consultants is a 13-person business management consulting firm. We focus our business solely on food and farm businesses. They are all local businesses doing business locally, not necessarily local to where we are as consultants, because we do work all over the country. And we help them in 5 distinct areas. Finance, which includes bookkeeping, accounting, financial turnarounds, fundraising, marketing, that's marketing strategy and marketing execution, leadership development, building leadership teams, longer-term strategy, opportunity assessment, which includes business planning, turnarounds, and building the organization. And finally, in professional development, we do classes in person on a regular basis. There's 13 of us in our team. We're located all over the country. And a third of our business is directly with producers, a third of our business is with the supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, co-packers, retailers, and a third of our business is with nonprofit and government organizations.
Wow. So kind of a wide range there. So part of your aspects of sound too is matchmaking between your customers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's many times when we have connected customers and vendors between our own client base.
Yeah. So let's kind of move into agriculture as a whole. What does sustainable agriculture, and more specifically a sustainable farm, mean to you?
Well, a sustainable farm is one that thinks about things from multiple aspects. And I did a lot of work with the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, and they recently polled their membership and came up with a kind of a definition of sustainable. And it was 3 parts of it. The first part was soil health. So, how are you taking care of the soil? The second part is nutrient density. So are those the quality of the food coming off of the soil that is more healthy for humans? And the third was financial viability and profit. And that's the way I would define sustainable agriculture, that we're taking care of the soil appropriately, that the food that is coming out of that soil has the highest level of quality to it, and that the entity and or organization is profitable so that it can live through multiple generations.
Yeah, that third key right there is something so many farmers tend to push to the back burner until it's too late.
Yes. It keeps me busy regularly with that third issue.
Yes. So, as a business leader, there are endless tasks to be done. How do you make sure to focus and tackle your most vital priorities?
Well, I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and he says, Ted, you've got a bit of ADD. I said, yeah, that's true. That's probably why, after running a bunch of businesses, I've decided to be a consultant and run a consulting firm. I have a very systematic process by which every Monday morning I go through a notebook that I have kept for probably 20 years now of every single client, the keywords, the key priorities. I transcribe those from week to week, and then I put together a task list for the week. That's all handwritten in pencil. There's something tactile about that transcribing that happens every week, at least for me, that makes a difference. Uh-huh. And then we also we have a CRM that we use that for following up with customers or opportunities from SalesWise. That's very systematic. Everything that has to do with sales, is in that CRM, and it keeps me on task. So that's the way I keep my priorities basis. And then on an annual basis, we do a SWOT analysis of our organization, set our priorities for the following year. In fact, we're in the middle of getting it done now, which then sort of leads to the bigger picture of what we're doing.
Gotcha. So then that's the kind of the weekly thing. Then on a daily aspect, do you have a specific habit that you feel like helps you keep going, or?
I use Google Calendar.
Okay.
And so if for instance, I know you scheduled some time with me, you can see it's pretty well filled up. But what I do is I schedule time. I mean, it's literally locked in from here to here, here to here to here. And then I have some open spaces, which periodically I leave open for somebody who wants to talk to me, because obviously the way I earn money, or our firm earns money, is we sell time. So I need to leave some time open. But I also do block time very specifically for getting things done. And I actually won't block much time during the day, but because I get up so early, which is typically 4 a.m., that time from 4 to 6 in the morning is my time to get my day organized, clean my emails out of my inbox. Oh, that's the other thing, is I am almost obsessive about having a clean inbox every morning.
Okay.
That keeps me organized. I'm touching it once and I'm getting it out of there and I'm dealing with it, or if I can't deal with it right then I'm setting a reminder for some time later on that I can deal with it.
That's really good, because that's one thing. I've fluctuated. Early this year I had a clean inbox, and lately it kind of has filled back up again. So I'm feeling a little guilty about that one.
At some point, emails become so old that they're not worth dealing with, and so you kind of have to do a massive purge. I have, unfortunately never gotten to that point, but I probably get between 200 and 300 emails a day. I would say a third of them are junk, and so I spend some time trying to just get rid of those. And then, then there's 100 to 150 that requires a glance, and then there's probably, 50 to 70 that require some response. Now, the other piece that I do is my response is, from a time management standpoint, quick and to the point where many people say, Ted, your emails are cryptic. And I'm like, look, they get the message across. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time writing something in an email that might be misconstrued later on anyway.
Yeah, I got a one-word email from you today.
Did it suffice? Did it not?
I knew exactly what you meant. Exactly. So yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your background. And you've had a long journey in this path. What would you say along the way? You've probably had some mentors that have kind of helped you learn what you've learned. What would you say the most influential lesson you've learned from one of your mentors has been? And how has it helped you become who you are today?
My earliest mentor was a neighbor at age 5 who taught me to put things back better than I found them. So he was a farm, and we would be working on the farm, and I might be digging a ditch or bucking hay or driving a tractor or building a fence or whatever it was. And his teaching, and it goes very much along the line with just-in-time manufacturing and lean manufacturing and some really basic principles, with when you do something, leave it better than you found it. And so conceptually, that's leave it better than you found it because it feels good, but also leave it better than you found it because then when you come back the next time, it's ready to go.
Yes.
Right? As opposed to when you need it in an emergency, you're in trouble. So that goes for somebody might think of that as operationally, but business wise, part of the reason that I have the system that I have to build these lists of things and the way that I've done it is because if I happen to not be able to touch it for a week or two, I can come back to it and it's full and I know what I need to get back to, right? So I'm leaving those things better than I found it. I'm finishing what I start. That's a pretty profound learning at a very early age from a mentor.
Absolutely. No, that's key. I know so many farms that if they could just put everything in one place, they would be so much further ahead and they'd be so much on a better path to being sustainable and profitable.
Well, and it's about doing it when you're doing it, not waiting till the next time, right? That's the point. Putting things back better than I found them. It's organization. It's sharp. The example that my friend, my mentor, who I called Chief, the best example I have was a shovel. If you go out and you dig in a ditch or you're cleaning a ditch out, when you're done, sharpen the shovel, clean it up, put WD-40 or oil on it so that it doesn't rust. Guess what? When you go to use it the next time, it's ready to use, as opposed to, oh, now I got to spend a bunch of time, especially, if it's an emergency, you got a ditch overrunning and you need to go dig stuff out and the shovel's all rusty and it's about to break and it's not sharp enough to cut the soil well. I mean, that's just the problem. So leave it better than you found it.
Absolutely. All right. So let's move into talking farm finance, because that's a key portion of what you guys do. What is the process you take when starting with a client? What key things are you looking for?
Well, we're looking for systems, Michael. I mean, the whole point behind building systems is, I kind of turn systems theory upside down. I mean, systems theory is to systematize 80% so that you've got your 80% of your work is just being done systematically and 20% you can spend your time. I want you to be able to spend 80% of your time thinking innovatively and getting things done. And your system should be built such that 20% of, your 20% of your stuff is in systems and 80% gives you free thinking. But there's certain things that are really important. So when we look at farm finances, it's systematic. It's building a process by which, every day, every week, every month, there are solid numbers that tell a story. And that's across all statements. So the profit and loss statement is what usually people focus on the most. But the balance sheet is probably more important because, we're working with a livestock farm right now, and they're growing livestock and they're making an investment into a breeding herd. They have all kinds of costs that are happening that show up on the P&L, but they're not showing their growth of their herd on their balance sheet. So they're losing money and they can't understand why. And that's back to, what systems and understanding those full financial statements and really doing it on a regular and consistent basis. And it's not just one, but that's what we look for. We look for building those systems, and a combination of building the systems, number one, and number two, making sure that those statements tell a story that not only the owner, but the key members of the organization really understand in order to be able to pull the levers. We don't care how much profit you make. We care how you make a profit.
Because I know some people are farming because they love it. And so they're okay with taking slightly lower margin, but other people are really in it because they want to make this a turnkey business.
Yeah. And again, coming back to they are farming because they love it. But if they, what the number one reason farms fail is?
They don't have money.
Lack of profit.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can, by the way, you can be profitable and have no cash. You can have lots of cash and not be profitable. In fact, I have numerous stories of farms that are in both cases wondering why. Once you get the financial statements in a reasonable systematic order, you can have that conversation. So I may have digressed slightly, Michael, from the original conversation, but the bottom line is it's systematically building financial statements processes that tell a clear and concise story. And by the way, that does not happen overnight. Even with the years of experience that we have in building financial statements and helping people build systems, the base systems are important, but there's always the nuance of the entrepreneur and how they've decided to run their operation that has to be adjusted ever so slightly, mostly for the farmer to understand themselves. 99% of the farms that I've worked with have the same issues. And the issue usually revolves mostly around the entrepreneur and how they want to perceive it. But that's a learning process, right?
Yeah. So let's kind of dive into that, right? You said there, because I think you said you're ADHD. I'm definitely ADHD. My wife is always talking about the squirrels. I feel like I have to go, check out. And I think so many farm entrepreneurs are. And so I don't think there's a solution for us because we're always going to be pulled for that. But how do you try to rein them in and give them focus so they can focus on what needs to be focused?
Well, it's called a budgeted distraction. We talk about bright, shiny objects and a budgeted distraction on a regular basis.
Okay.
What I've watched over 30 some odd years of running businesses and 10 plus years of consultants, and it's been more than 10 years now of consulting with businesses, is that if you do not have a budgeted distraction, meaning that you sit down and say, these are the things that I'm going to allow for myself, both in time and money to do, and you don't budget for it, then you will see a bunch of squirrels and go off running in a bunch of different directions. But if you identify that it's fine to have again, remember the key word there, budgeted distraction, which says, I will allow myself to spend this amount of my time each week and this amount of money each month on this budgeted distraction. It actually is as painful as it says sometimes, because like, as an entrepreneur with ADD, it's like, oh, I don't want to be controlled. But the reality is that once you say to yourself and or have a coach who says, okay, you can do that, but it's not allowed to impinge upon your core business, it actually makes a big difference.
Because it gives you almost a freedom so you don't feel guilty for doing that. And it helps you to bring it to the surface and allow everyone to see what's going on. And they probably have great ideas around what you're trying to do that could actually make it a very viable part of your business.
Or not, right? Yes. Which is fine. I mean, but by the way, it's okay. It's about giving yourself permission with some guidance and some bumpers that says, I'm allowed to go look at other things, but I can't hurt my core business, right? Correct. That's the thing. Yes. And because the standard entrepreneur's answer is always, well, you don't get it. This is a great opportunity. It's unbelievable. This is going to be the next, I don't know what, insert the, innovative, whatever. The next Apple. I'm like, yeah, right. Okay. Maybe it's the next Apple. That's fine. But let's make sure that it doesn't impinge upon, your business. And I have, we call them bright, shiny objects and budgeted distractions, right? We all love bright, shiny objects, and then we just need to make sure that we budget that level of distraction in the two limited resources of time or money. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's move into some myths. Can you share some common myths that farmers believe around finance? Because I know there are a lot out there. Common myths. That's an interesting way to put it, Michael. Well, let's see. What would I think is a common myth? That other businesses have it much easier than farmers. And having worked in, manufacturing, distribution, retail, IT, I was actually on Wall Street for a couple of years. There is one piece of being a farmer that is much more difficult, and that is Mother Nature has a significantly greater impact, or has the ability to have a significantly greater impact. But the myth that a farmer thinks that their life is so much harder and that nobody understands that it's, it's just not easy to do this. That I would say is the number one myth is that, having worked with probably closer to 500 businesses at this point, there is no easy, like every business is equally messed up. Every business is just as hard. A commodity farmer has no sales issues other than price, right? I mean, they can turn their product into cash in a heartbeat. Yeah. Even an organic farmer, which you might or might not consider a commodity, can turn their product into cash immediately. There's very few businesses that can turn their a non-farm business that can turn their product into cash immediately. So, it doesn't make it easier or harder. But that would be the biggest myth that I would talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we do have weather to deal with. But again, as you said, it balances out with there's so many advantages as well that I think we all have to realize that there's always going to be that thing that we feel we're entitled to, but that's not true.
Right.
Yeah, It's a level playing field out there.
Well put.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the financial challenges you see farmers facing in today's business environment. I know like dairy recently, conventional dairy went through a massive downturn. What are some other aspects you're seeing happening lately?
Well, I mean, as anybody who's in the Northeast knows this year was a horrifically bad weather year, right? I mean, anybody vegetable farming. Now, livestock didn't have quite as much of an issue when I look across our clients, but vegetables, oh my goodness. Anybody that has to do with harvesting and or distribution of vegetables is just hurting. And that's a big challenge this year. And that's Mother Nature. The other big challenge, I think, is, at least from a local farmer standpoint, is that, all of a sudden, corporate America has identified that the need to be able to source identify, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, source identifying ends up becoming a marketing term for much of corporate America, right? That source identification has become mainstream. And so when you're a small local farmer now trying to differentiate yourself on a direct-to-consumer basis becomes more and more difficult. I think it's a great thing to do. But the reality is that local food production is really important. Source identification is really important. But getting your food into a conventional supply chain as quickly as possible is what is, in the long term, going to be able to keep everybody financially viable. The supply chain has been built to be really stupid efficient. The difference between trying to sell your product at a farmer's market and getting it into the supply chain and being sold at the local grocery store from a cost standpoint for you as a farmer, this is where farmers don't count their time, right? Towards that is huge. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a diversified set of channels that you sell in, but that conventional supply chain, getting it into as quickly as you can into restaurants and retailers through a distribution network or broker network or whatever you want to do, is a really critical component for the long term. Because one of the things that I think we're seeing is somewhat of a fatigue of the upper echelon that can afford to go to farmers markets, both from a time standpoint and a money standpoint. Remember, you asked me what was sustainable agriculture: quality soil, quality food, quality profitability. If you want to get that into that mainstream process where we're not, instead of feeding 3 to 5% of the population, we're feeding 50, 60, 70% of the population, then you do have to use some level of conventional supply chain.
So then obviously with that level of conventional supply chain, you're looking at food safety. You have to implement it on your farm. You have to be incredibly efficient, and it comes back to, you have to know your numbers.
Yeah, and I actually don't think it's that hard, relatively speaking. I mean, we have numerous clients who have done that. I'm sure you do too. It's a mindset. And by the way, once you focus on those things, it's the 80-20 rule, right? I mean, if they get really efficient, and I think you can become a lot more efficient at the farming part, including food safety, if you focus on that as opposed to trying to be everything to everyone, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's where it comes down to is, you look at a farm that's growing 60 to 80 different crops, and there's no way you can be efficient at that.
That's right.
So, when you dial it into maybe your 8 or 12 that you do the best, that's where you can, again, get into that supply chain, be efficient, and push that long-term sustainability and profitability.
Michael, I'm probably going to make an aside here, but that's kind of where the CSA, that started, 15, 20 years ago, community supported agriculture to me means more than you're just buying from the farm. The whole premise of CSAs was a combination of your buying direct to the farm, number one. Number two, you're giving them their operating capital to start everything up when they begin. And number three, which you and I both know has sort of been watered down over the last years, is that you win and lose with that farm. So if you bought a $700 share at the beginning of the year, and each week you're supposed to get $38 worth of product, and my math is probably wrong, the farms and the supporters who really believe in community supported agriculture have, this week I only got $20 because we had a bad crop of potatoes.
Yes.
Most farms have gotten to the point where, or not most, a good number have gotten to the point where if they don't have that $38, they actually go out and buy it right? And I think the next generation of CSA goes back to crowdfunding and actually supporting financially the local farms by making true monetary investments with the expectation of a monetary return to support those smaller farms and that are going to grow and be part of our economic fabric. So I know I've taken a little bit of a side there, but that to me is a really key point of the future of local farms.
No, I think that was great to bring up, because I think there isn't a tremendous amount of change in that arena right now. And I think people are wondering, what is going on? But there's some real, as you said, some real key principles there of how it's changed and why that's changing for the farmers as well. So last week we had Ben Beichler on the podcast and dove deep into his farm story. It's really remarkable what they've done in such a short amount of time at their farm. They're now, I think, over 300 herd share members. What do you think are some of the keys for Ben's success?
I love Ben. I'd like to say it was me, but it's not me. Ben and I talk every week for 20 minutes. I've been mentoring Ben for 3 or 4 years now.
Okay.
The number one thing for Ben's success is his tenacity. I mean, he just doesn't quit. Period. End of story. He hits a wall and he turns left, right, up, and down. And that's really true. The other two things are really they're the two things that I say are the most important things you need to know to be an entrepreneur. And the first one of those is you need to know how to, and both of them are euphemisms, by the way. So you need to know how to plunge a toilet, and you need to know how to use Excel.
Yes.
The plunge a toilet is an entrepreneur, and this applies, to a farmer, is that you're going to do whatever it takes. Like, I don't care. I mean, if I'm in a suit and the toilet's overflowing, I'm going to plunge the toilet. There's just no way around that. I got to do it.
Yeah.
That's kind of an entrepreneur. That's tenacity. That's just, what I said, what has made Ben successful is just pure tenacity. The second is, in fact, Excel. And again, Excel is a little bit of a euphemism for that, but it's not, because when Ben and I started down this journey together, I don't even think Ben actually knew how to use Excel at the time. I mean, he actually spent a little bit of time with Google Sheets or whatever. In fact, I know he didn't even have it on his computer. We had to discuss whether he was using Google Sheets, and I'm not Huge fan of Google Sheets, although I've become more of a convert. I've always used Excel for 30 years, or whatever it is. So we got him started on Excel, and he had seen how it had been used by one of his previous employers. And all of a sudden, he starts understanding why it's important. And what's important about it is, and this is the deeper piece, which is it gives you the opportunity to systematically look at the same set of problems 14 different ways very quickly once you set it up with a structure. So, so it's literally the euphemism for a structured thought process, right? Yeah. Those of us who have ADD can wander all over the place, but when you come back to putting it down on a piece of paper and laying it out in a grid, which is what Excel effectively is, you then create some structure around the thought process. And so it's one of the reasons why when we do business planning, we start with a P&L, a budget. Yeah. Why? Because, well, you got sales, you have cost of goods sold, you have expenses, you have labor. Well, what does that do? Somebody says, I'm going to do $1 million in sales next year. Well, I'm going to put it into Excel, and then I'm going to say, okay, tell me who you're getting it for, right? Yeah. Who are they from? Well, I'm going to get it from a wholesale market and this farmer's market. Okay, give me a little more detail, right? Structure. Excel is forcing a structured thought process. Now, the great thing about Excel is once you've laid it out, if you've done it with something, and Ben has learned how to do this as many other people, once you've laid it out and you have a structured format to do it, and you do it in a way that allows for some sensitivity, we call sensitivity analysis, then you very quickly can say, well, what if we had 20% more sales, but our COGS were this much more? In a few strokes of a key, you can say, wow, if I just added this. So to Ben goes back and says, well, I know where my break even is because here's all my costs, and all I need to do is change one little cell and increase my sales, and everything else flows through formulaically. Now I know my break even is 328 per shares. Now he's got a really clear target to go after, which he and his wife really worked hard at doing. Yeah. Those are the two things. I mean, he's just done an exceptional job of doing whatever it takes, tenacity, and then having a very structured approach to doing that. So when he goes to his customers, when he goes to his funders, when he goes to whatever, he's got really good numbers and thought process. And a lot of it has been, he spends a lot of time noodling on it. Yeah. But then when he goes to deliver it, it shows a very thoughtful process that he can back up from a lot of thought.
Yeah, and I know he had an opportunity recently, which I'm not so sure it's going to actually happen now, to actually add some acreage. Yeah. And I was like, well, they'll let you do that? He's like, yeah, I penciled the numbers and I showed him exactly how it's going to affect the farm. And they were like, yeah, go for it. Yeah. Which was crazy to me. But I think the point you're bringing out is so often we feel like as farmers, we have to be out in the field, hoeing the carrots or doing that. But where we really need to be spending our time is in the office in Excel.
Well, I think there's a balancing act. Obviously, you can't not hoe your. Yeah. I mean, here's the point, and you said it. You, as a farmer, you would never not hoe the carrots, right? Yeah, it's not going to happen. You can't do it. You would never not water those carrots, or you never not milk your cows. Taking care of the entity's financial well-being, record keeping is no different than any one of those other functions, and that organization will literally wither up and die if you don't take care of those things too. Right? So, that's interesting because that's one of the things that as we've evolved our practice and spent more time, I actually, while we are paid by the entrepreneur, the business owner, we actually represent the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about going back to a farm beginning. If there was a magic reset button that you could kind of put in place with some of these farms you work with, what systems would you go back and put in place sooner rather than later?
Oh, that's easy. QuickBooks.
Okay. So you see a lot of farmers start with just either paper and pencil or some other program, and you just transition them all to QuickBooks.
Well, they may be starting with QuickBooks. It's really the use. I mean, maybe I need to qualify that. It's the use. Like it's the consistent use. It would be QuickBooks and Excel, right? I mean, those are the two things. It's the consistent use of both of those. And the understanding that would be what we just come back to that over and over again because it gives you a manner with which to measure your financial success.
So you would say it's kind of like the farm compass or the business compass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the biggest, obviously I don't know if this is kind of a very similar question, but what is the biggest mistake you see beginning farmers making?
The biggest single mistake I see beginning farmers making? Jumping in without a plan. Without a financial plan.
Yep.
Not spending enough time learning on somebody else's dime. I think about John and Amy Good, who are up in the Lehigh Valley, and the story that they tell about how they got to where they are.
Okay.
And their story includes, I think they spent close to 10 years, maybe more than that, maybe 15, working for somebody else.
Okay.
And learning on their dime. Like there's no substitute for experience, but why pay for it yourself?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they sought out the best farmers they could find. They worked as interns. They got paid. They worked their butts off. They learned somebody else's systems. They learned somebody else's mistakes. And then, I mean, Michael, think about what you and I both do as consultants, right? We're leveraging the mistakes we made, right? To a large extent.
Yes.
And, I always say it's my job to help entrepreneurs achieve their dreams and not make the same mistakes I made.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so those mistakes cost me a lot of money and some gray hair. As I'm sure you too. And so the sooner you can find that mentor or that coach or that job that you actually put the time in. And here's the other piece, which I think is a little bit tough, but in business, the rule is 10,000 hours.
Yep.
Right? It takes 10,000 hours to become an expert, which is effectively 5 years, right? There's 2,000 work hours in a year if you work 40 hours a week. I think that's either double or triple in agriculture.
Yeah, I would say that's true. It's about 6 years in of working 70-hour weeks when we really think we started to hit the numbers we wanted to.
Well, and part of the reason for that is that in agriculture, this is the one, this is the Mother Nature part, right?
Yeah.
You get one chance a year effectively, right?
Exactly. It's not like in manufacturing, we could just keep tweaking processes because we're in a very controlled environment. But right. Once you're in a farming, you say, okay, there's one really big planting season and one really big harvest season.
Yeah, well, and if you happen to be grass-fed beef, you literally have a 3-year cycle, right? From conception to consumption is literally 3 years. And you eat that first animal and it's not good and you don't know why. And you've got 2 cycles of animals backed up behind that. So that's why I said I think in agriculture it's 10 to 15 years. Probably in vegetable production it's a little bit shorter, and in livestock production it's a little bit longer. But it takes a long time to get to the knowledge and expertise. So the more you can go, somebody says, well, I can't afford to go work for the wages that they're going to pay. Well, what are they paying? Well, they're paying $10 an hour. So that means you're going to make $20,000 a year ostensibly if you have year-round work. There's plenty of farms that I know that lose a heck of a lot more than $20,000 easily in a year, right? So you can say, I can either work for $20,000 and scrape by, or I can spend a lot of money learning on a learning curve and then come out with, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt on the other side. I think that's the other thing that Ben spent, as frustrating as it was for Ben, spent a number of years working for other people, learning, and he ultimately learned, I think the thing that ultimately pushed him over the edge is he just didn't want to work for somebody else. But Ben had, I don't know, you know this better than I do.
Yeah.
5, 8, 10 years of learning on somebody else's dime, right?
Yeah. Yeah. First for Polyface, then he was kind of working with Polyface and stuff. Then he worked up for the family cow.
Yeah.
Then he worked for the other guy in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Cliff Hallbaker. Yep.
Yeah. So he had a number, and every single person he said, taught me something that I needed in my operation that I'm using today.
That's right. And he learned on their dime, even though maybe the outcomes were good or bad at the end of each of those things, who knows? But he learned on their dime, not on his own.
Yeah.
Right? And that, that's a relatively inexpensive way to do that. There's how many of us have gone to college and spent a lot of money to go to do that, right? But we're not going to get paid a lower wage to learn. I've many times said really good farmers probably ought to charge.
Yes.
Somebody come work with them for a few years, because you're going to save. Ben, as you said, Ben is making a little bit of money, and it didn't take him very long to get there. And he purchased a very large piece of property, and he got super support to do that. Why? Because he made a very long investment of his time with other people.
Yeah. If you look at Ben's trajectory in 10, 15 years, he's going to be set up very, very well.
Yep.
Provided
Mother Nature doesn't wreak havoc, but
exactly, yes. Yeah. But if he keeps on where he's headed, he's going to be doing very well.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about hiring and keeping great teams. What strategies have you implemented in your business to bring in the right kind of people? But then also in the agriculture community, what strategies do you see farmers doing to bring in the right people?
So there's a couple of things: hire slow, fire fast. right? So, I've hired probably close to 1,000 people in my career and probably fired close to that many too. And so hiring is a really important part of the process, which is just, take the time to really hire carefully. Now, sometimes you don't have any choice and it doesn't, you're hiring an hourly person to just go hoe beats, okay, or whatever. You may or may not spend as much time. But then if they're not working out, get rid of them, right? So that's the first thing that I really stress with my clients. The second piece is that there's no substitute for some level of experience. I mean, we find with a lot of our clients, we find that there's so much mission-based work. I'm passionate about this. Not that they're nonprofits, but they're passionate about this. And so they typically hire people who believe in what they're doing. And that works to a certain point. But after a certain point, having actual experience. Look, I grew up on a farm. It was my farm. From age 13 to age 20, I was cutting hay, bucking hay, changing pipes. It's hard freaking work. And I think there's a lot of people who look at it and go, it's not that, don't see the romance in doing it, but don't understand how hard it is. And so there is no substitute for finding people that actually know how hard a work it is. So that, on day 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 of blazing hot sun or water or whatever it is, they're going, hey, you know what? I don't like this, but I understand it. And so that's the other pieces, is that finding that right balance between people with experience and people with passion and building your team with the appropriate balance. Sometimes farmers, especially in the sustainable world, want somebody that, understands their mission and are totally culturally aligned. At some point, it's actually easier to teach culture than it is to teach experience.
And just like one point right there with tractor driving, if you have a large piece of machinery, there's a long process that goes into knowing how to manage that piece of machinery.
I'm chuckling because I won't get on another piece of machinery because I've done more damage because of my lack of experience than it's worth. So
yeah. But one of the things on our farm was we ended up finding a local kid that had basically grown up on a farm with big tractors. And he made a complete change on our farm. And basically it got me off the tractor because he knew how to do that stuff. He knew how to fix them, and he also knew how to drive them. And there's something about that, because those are sometimes not easy at all to get to do exactly what you want, especially in a vegetable operation where everything is, down to the inch.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a really good point. So what new innovations or forces are changing the market right now? And how are you adapting how you're working with farmers or the strategy you're using?
Innovations, I think, goes back to the whole thing of that local source identified farms, food is becoming mainstream. Whether it's organic, source identified is kind of a broad term, but that innovation comes back to, I think farmers have to be, if they're getting into it or expanding, they have to recognize that being able to sell wholesale is not a dirty word. And that just because you can get $8 a pound for ground beef if you're selling direct to consumer, but only $3 for ground beef if you're selling to a wholesaler, isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it comes back to mainstream is coming after source identified local food. And so that innovation of getting into that, and it doesn't sound like innovation, but in fact, I think it is, because I think most people who are dealing with, local sustainable food, most of the people you and I are probably dealing with are thinking about selling direct to consumer because it's got that premium price.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part. It cannot be the only part. They have got to diversify their sources, their channels of income.
Yeah, because Kroger's not going away, Costco's not going away, Walmart's not going away. And if we want to keep taking over the food system, we have to be in that chain.
Yes. As much as I am not a fan of the marketing part of this, where it's just doing something for the marketing part, at the end of the day, does the means justify the ends? I don't know, but selling direct to consumer has a limited marketplace. It will only get so big. And quite frankly, Michael, mostly because I don't think that this is about getting really, really good at a few things, right? So if you're a farmer and you become really, really good at growing crops or raising livestock, do you actually have the bandwidth and ability to then go market direct to consumer? The farms that I see most successful in doing that do actually split the businesses and have somebody responsible for each of the businesses. And the characteristic of being a really good farmer is different characteristic than being a really good marketer, right?
Yeah.
You want to be a farmer because you want to be out in the middle of the field all by yourself digging in the dirt, right?
Exactly.
That's the reason why you want to be a farmer. I don't know anybody who wants to be a marketer who wants to be all by themselves in the middle of a field digging the dirt. It just doesn't quite work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My business partner and I have a very clear delineation of responsibilities. I don't do retail. I do not want to be in front of the retail customer. I don't like it. I love being business to business, but being in front of a retail customer, that's just not me. I mean, I have some probably words that shouldn't be recorded that I would say about it. But, so that's the point, I guess, is that get really, really good at the innovation is stop chasing the bright, shiny object of direct to consumer all by itself and understand that what you really want to do is grow really good food and really good soil and be profitable. And the innovation is you don't have to sell direct to consumer to do that.
Yeah, I think that right there is a myth that people think about farming, is that you have to do that direct to consumer. And yeah, I guess you said, while it's profitable, it may not be for you.
Well, and it might be profitable, but I've seen it across multiple farms. They can be just as profitable, if not more profitable, with a lot less headache when they focus in on one particular aspect.
So let's talk about your company now. You talked about a little bit earlier about the services you offer, but how do you find new clients, and what's the average kind of length that you work with them?
So you just asked a whole bunch of questions. So let's start with the first question, Michael. What was the first question?
The first question was, how are you getting new clients? How do you find new farms to work with?
So our clients come from, there's probably three places our clients come from. Number one, which is the obvious one, is just doing a great job for an existing client. Right?
So
what keeps us awake at night is that we have to provide more value than we cost. Right? Number two is presentations. So we are regularly given presentations at trade shows, conferences, et cetera. And we find that 2-3 years later, people will come and say, "Hey, I was at your presentation and I'd like some help with this, or this."
Okay.
And then the third is just generally being out there. It's just brand awareness. It's social media, email marketing. It's just all of those things that just happen. And I can't put a dot on the wall that says this is it. But we've been around now for 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And just being out there and in the community, whether it's on a nonprofit board, whether it's social media, whatever it is, just drives branding and knowledge of us.
Okay. And I think
there's something about that 5-year rule, right? 10,000 hours. And, I've been consulting for 10 years. Kitchen Table's been around for 6. That builds a level of just people that know us.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think the second question is, how long do you usually work with farms for?
Depends on what we're doing, because there's sometimes it's project engaged, help us write a business plan, help us get financing, help us set up an accounting system, help us build an on-farm market, help us build a marketing plan. Those things are typically somewhere in the 3 to 6 month range.
Okay.
If it's, with a number of farms, it's longer term. It's, hey, we're doing a succession planning, we're building our leadership team, we've got some real financial difficulties and we need to, pivot our model and we need to go raise funding. In those cases, that's 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Wow. So a lot longer term.
Yeah, it really just depends on what the underlying need is and the strength of the leadership and management team to follow through.
Gotcha. Absolutely. Yeah. Because as you said, it comes back to the entrepreneur and the leadership team to really take what you tell them and really run with it, make it actually happen.
Yeah. And depending on how much help they need, it could be a lot longer relationship or a shorter relationship.
Gotcha. All right. So final question here. Do you believe that now is the best time to start a farm? And if so, why?
Well, I'm going to start with my favorite question. How do you make a small fortune in farming?
Yes. You start with a large one.
You got it. So is now the best? I don't think there is a best time to start farming. Farming is most certainly an opportunity to follow some of your passion, right? Nobody's doing farming because they want to get rich. There's no doubt about that in the local foods world.
Yeah.
I think that there is a sea of change coming around, the sustainability conversation. We see it, both politically and community-wise and everything. So is now the time to get started in farming? Michael, I'm not trying to sidestep your question. I don't know if now is any better or any worse, but I do know that starting farming, if that's what you want to do it, but do it carefully, right? Back to the point of go learn on somebody else's dime for a little while. Go figure out where the opportunity is and spend the time and or money understanding what's going on before you jump in with 2 feet. right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what Ben did, right? I mean, that's what we came back to. Ben spent a bunch of time learning from somebody else before he jumped in with 2 feet. And Ben got a very significant amount of money supporting him to do that from outside people, banks, FSA, Iroquois Valley Farms, because he could show that he was going to deliver results, and he has.
Yeah.
So I'm not sidestepping the question, but the answer is, is now a better time than another? No, it's not a worse time either, though.
Yeah. And I guess to that point you're saying is that, life is short though. And if you do want to farm, do start farming. Because as you said, it's not like, this year is better than next year or be better than last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a minute conversation around timing, which is, if land prices are at the peak, you might want to wait a little bit because there is a definite cycle to land prices, right?
Yeah.
But is now the right or the wrong time? If I knew that, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today, Michael. And that's not because I don't like you. It's because I would be able to see into the future a heck of a lot better than anybody else can. So.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Ted, thank you so much for your time today. This has been very enjoyable just to kind of deep dive into the whole finance world of farming and I think it's also the planning side, just, really making sure you get the education and the planning before you go ahead and dive in. So Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it, Michael.
All right. Have a great day. So there you have it. Another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.